Have you ever stood in the ruins of something you thought would last forever? A relationship, a dream, a version of yourself, and asked, why did this happen to me? The pain feels random, cruel, like the universe reached down and shattered your life without reason. You search for meaning in the wreckage, but all you find is silence. And in that silence, a question rises like smoke. Was this just bad luck? Or is there something I'm not seeing? Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What if nothing in your life is random? What if every betrayal, every loss, every moment of suffering was not punishment, but preparation? What if the universe wasn't breaking you, but breaking you open? In today's video, we will walk through the Jungian understanding of synchronicity and the hidden order behind chaos. The 7 truths that reveal why nothing happens by chance and how your soul orchestrates every experience for your awakening. Because it's in the moment you stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance that you discover the truth. You are not lost in the chaos. You are being guided through it. There's a particular kind of suffering that comes not from pain itself, but from believing that pain has no purpose. When something devastating happens, a sudden loss, a betrayal, a dream that crumbles, your mind desperately seeks a reason. What did I do wrong? What was the point? And when no answer comes, you're left with something worse than grief, the terror of meaninglessness. Jung spent decades studying what he called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reveal a hidden order beneath the surface of life. He discovered that the unconscious mind, both personal and collective, communicates through events, symbols, and patterns that seem random but are actually precisely orchestrated. When you say, "This can't be a coincidence," you're touching something Jung knew to be true. The psyche and the external world are not separate. They mirror each other. The unconscious doesn't speak in words. It speaks in experiences. When you ignore its whispers, the quiet pull toward change, the recurring dreams, the patterns you refuse to see, it will eventually shout through crisis. What feels like chaos breaking into your life is often the self, your deepest nature, breaking through the rigid walls of the ego. Many believe that suffering is proof the universe is indifferent or cruel. But in truth, every disruption is an invitation. Jung understood that the psyche has an intelligence far greater than conscious will. It knows what you need to become whole, even when your ego resists. That breakup that felt like the end? It was the death of a pattern that kept you small. That job loss that shattered your identity? It was the collapse of a persona that no longer served your soul's evolution. I once spoke with a woman who, in the span of 6 months, lost her marriage, her job, and her home. She described it as feeling like the ground had dissolved beneath her feet. I kept asking, what did I do to deserve this? She said, but in therapy, she began to notice something strange. Every loss had occurred precisely when she'd been ignoring a deep inner call to change. Her marriage had been lifeless for years, but she stayed out of fear. Her job drained her soul, but she stayed for security. One day, she opened her journal and saw a note she'd written 3 years earlier. I feel trapped in a life that isn't mine. She realized then that her unconscious had been screaming for years. And when she wouldn't listen, it orchestrated the collapse. I didn't lose everything, she told me months later. I was freed from everything that kept me from myself. Think of a seed buried in soil. From above, it looks like nothing is happening, just darkness, pressure, silence. But beneath the surface, an intelligence is at work. The seed is dissolving its old form, sending roots into the unknown, preparing for transformation. What looks like death is actually the beginning of life. Your breakdowns are the same. They are not the end of your story. They are the dark soil where your becoming takes root. When life falls apart, your first instinct is to ask, why is this happening to me? But the deeper question is, what is this trying to teach me? The moment you shift from victim to student, suffering becomes initiation. You stop resisting the lesson and start receiving it. And in that surrender, you discover that chaos wasn't your enemy. It was your guide. Nothing happens by chance. Not the pain, not the timing, not the people who leave or arrive. Every disruption is the soul's way of realigning you with your truth. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. Have you ever noticed the same relationship dynamic playing out with different people? The same career struggles in different companies? The same self-sabotage in different forms? It's as if life is handing you the same test over and over, just with different faces and settings. And each time, you think this time will be different. But it never is. Not until you see the pattern. Jung called this repetition compulsion the unconscious drive to recreate unresolved wounds until they're brought into awareness. The shadow, the disowned parts of yourself, doesn't just hide in your psyche. It shows up in your relationships, your choices, your life circumstances. What you refuse to face within, you will meet outside. That's not punishment. That's the psyche's relentless compassion, giving you chance after chance to heal. The ego loves familiarity. Even painful patterns feel safe because they're known. When you repeat the same mistakes, it's not because you're weak or broken. It's because part of you is still trying to resolve something from the past, to rewrite an old story. But the unconscious can't heal what it doesn't see. So it creates situations that force you to look. Every repeat is not failure. It's another invitation to wake up. A man once shared with me that he'd walked away from 5 relationships in 3 years. Each time, he felt suffocated, trapped, desperate to escape. They all turned controlling, he said. But in therapy, he began to see a pattern. Every time intimacy deepened, he would suddenly feel caged. His therapist asked, "What did closeness mean in your childhood?" He went silent. Then he remembered. His mother's love had been conditional, smothering. To survive, he learned to equate love with loss of self. I wasn't running from them, he realized. I was running from the fear that love means disappearing. Once he saw the pattern, once he named the shadow, something shifted. He stopped running. 6 months later, he was still in a relationship, not because he forced himself, but because the pattern had finally been seen and therefore released. Imagine a river that keeps flowing back to the same rock. It doesn't do this to torture itself. It flows there because something is unfinished, erosion that needs completing, a lesson carved in stone. Eventually, the rock smooths, the water moves on. Your life is the same. The patterns don't repeat to punish you. They repeat to polish you, to wear down the resistance until you finally see what's been there all along. If you've ever felt stuck in a repeating pattern, leave one word in the comments. Again, because just naming it, just seeing it, is the beginning of breaking it. The next time you find yourself in a familiar struggle, pause. Ask, where have I felt this before? Not just in circumstances, but in your body, your emotions. The pattern is trying to show you something your conscious mind has been avoiding. When you stop running and start looking, the cycle breaks. Not through force, but through awareness. Patterns don't repeat to trap you. They repeat to free you. And the moment you see them clearly, you stop being their prisoner and become their witness. That's when everything changes, not because life stops testing you, but because you finally understand the test. When trauma strikes, the mind searches frantically for meaning. Why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? And when no satisfying answer comes, the wound deepens. You begin to believe you were cursed, forgotten, or cosmically unlucky. But what if your wounds weren't random acts of cruelty? What if they were soul assignments? Jung spoke often of the wounded healer, the archetype that reveals how our deepest pain becomes our greatest gift. Your wounds, he believed, are not accidents of birth or bad luck. They are the specific injuries your soul chose to transform, the darkness you agreed to walk through so you could eventually light the way for others. The collective unconscious doesn't hand out suffering carelessly. It gives you precisely the wound you have the capacity to heal and transmute. Many believe wounds are proof of weakness or punishment, but in truth, your specific pain is proof of your specific calling. The child who grew up unseen becomes the adult who truly sees others. The one who was abandoned learns to never abandon themselves or anyone else. Your wound is not your flaw. It's your portal. Jung said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you. Not despite your pain, but through it." I once knew a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. When I asked why that focus, she told me, "Because I lived it." She'd grown up in a home where emotions were forbidden, needs were ignored, safety was conditional. For years, she carried shame, believing she was damaged, unworthy, too broken to ever be whole. But in her own healing journey, she realized something profound. My wound gave me a language for suffering that those who never hurt could never speak. She didn't heal despite her pain. She healed through it. And now, she sits with others in their darkness, not as someone who escaped pain, but as someone who transformed it. "I wouldn't wish my childhood on anyone," she said. "But I also know that wound is why I can do this work. It's why people feel safe with me, because I know what it's like to be lost in the dark." In Japanese culture, there's an art form called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks aren't hidden. They're highlighted, honored, made beautiful. The bowl isn't valuable despite being broken. It's valuable because it was broken and remade. Your wounds are the same. They are not your shame. They are the golden seams that make you irreplaceable. Stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" And start asking, "What is this teaching me to become?" Your wound is not your identity, but it is your initiation. When you stop seeing it as a curse and start seeing it as a calling, you stop being a victim of your past and become the author of your future. The pain that once destroyed you becomes the foundation of your purpose. Your wounds were never random. They were sacred assignments, given to the only soul strong enough to carry them. You didn't break by accident. You broke open so the light could finally get in. There are losses that feel like death, not just endings, but erasures. The person you thought you'd grow old with, the dream you poured years into, the version of yourself you thought you'd always be. And in those moments, it feels like life took something from you without permission, without reason, without mercy. You stand in the wreckage and whisper, "What was it all for?" Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires continual death and rebirth. The ego clings to what's familiar, but the self knows what must be released for growth to occur. Every ending is not a failure of your will or a mistake of fate. It's the psyche's ruthless compassion, clearing space for what's next. Jung said, "There is no birth of consciousness without pain." What you're grieving isn't just what you lost. It's who you must stop being to become who you're meant to be. The ego believes that if you work hard enough, love deeply enough, plan carefully enough, you can control outcomes. But the self operates on a deeper timeline. It doesn't care about your ego's plans. It cares about your soul's evolution. So when loss comes, it feels like betrayal, life breaking a promise. But what if life was keeping a different promise? The promise to never let you settle for less than your fullest becoming, even if that means burning down what felt safe. A man once told me he'd built his entire identity around being a musician. He practiced for hours every day, sacrificed relationships, poured everything into his dream. Then, at 35, he developed a nerve condition that made playing impossible. "I didn't just lose my career," he said. "I lost myself." For months, he was paralyzed by grief and rage. But slowly, in the silence where music used to be, he started to hear something else, a pull toward teaching, toward mentoring young musicians. He resisted at first, believing it was a consolation prize. But the more he taught, the more alive he felt. "I thought I lost my purpose," he said a year later. "But what I really lost was my ego's narrow definition of it. The music didn't leave me. It just changed form. In nature, some seeds only germinate after fire. They lie dormant for years, waiting for the heat that will crack their shell and release them. The forest must burn for new growth to begin. Your losses are the same. What felt like destruction was actually activation. The fire that consumed your old life wasn't ending your story. It was clearing the ground for what couldn't grow in the shade of who you used to be. When something ends, don't rush to fill the void. Sit in the emptiness. Let it teach you. Ask, what is trying to be born that couldn't exist before? Loss is not absence. It's space. And space is where transformation happens. Trust that what left was making room. Trust that the ground beneath you, though it feels barren now, is rich with seeds you haven't yet seen. Everything you lost was leading you here. Not to less, but to more. Not to the end, but to the beginning of what your soul always knew was waiting. You didn't lose your way. You were being redirected. Few things wound as deeply as betrayal. The friend who ghosted you. The partner who chose someone else. The mentor who turned cold. These departures don't just hurt. They shatter your sense of safety, your belief that love is reliable. And in the aftermath, you're left asking, what did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? Jung taught that we don't see people as they are, we see them through the lens of our projections. Every relationship is a mirror, reflecting both our light and our shadow. The people who hurt us are not accidents or villains. They are messengers, showing us the parts of ourselves we've been refusing to see. When someone leaves, they're not just exiting your life. They're completing a lesson your soul needed to learn. The ego wants people to stay. It craves consistency, loyalty, permanence. But the self knows better. It knows when someone's presence is keeping you comfortable instead of helping you grow. So it orchestrates exits, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally. The person who leaves isn't always wrong or cruel. Sometimes they're simply done playing the role your unconscious assigned them. And their departure is the universe saying, you've learned what you needed. Now it's time to walk alone. A woman once shared that her best friend of 10 years suddenly cut her off without explanation. "I was devastated," she said. "I kept replaying every conversation, searching for what I did wrong." Months later, in therapy, she realized something uncomfortable. The friendship had been one-sided for years. She was always the giver, the supporter, the one who bent. Her friend's departure wasn't cruelty. It was a mirror showing her a pattern she'd been blind to, her need to earn love by sacrificing herself. When she left, I was forced to ask, why do I only feel valuable when I'm needed? That question changed everything. She started setting boundaries in other relationships, saying no, letting people show up for her. Losing her was the most painful gift, she said, because it taught me I don't have to diminish myself to be loved. A snake doesn't mourn its old skin. It sheds it because staying in it would mean death. The skin served its purpose, protected the snake through one stage of growth. But to grow further, it must be released. People are the same. Some are meant to walk with you for a season, not a lifetime. Their departure isn't rejection. It's completion. They played their part in your becoming. Now you must continue without them. When someone leaves, resist the urge to chase or self-blame. Instead, ask, what was this person reflecting back to me? What did I learn? Every departure teaches you something about boundaries, about your worth, about the parts of you still seeking external validation. The pain of their absence is showing you where you've been giving your power away. When you reclaim it, you'll realize they didn't take anything from you. They revealed what was already missing. The people who leave are not your loss. They are your liberation. They came to show you something you couldn't see, and when the lesson was complete, They left so you could finally stand on your own. You were never abandoned. You were being prepared to meet yourself. If you're watching this, you've likely walked through seasons where life felt cruel and random, where every loss seemed senseless, every wound seemed unfair, every ending seemed like proof that you were forgotten. But what if none of it was random? What if every collapse was an opening? What if every person who left was clearing space? What if every wound was shaping you into exactly who you were always meant to become? Carl Jung spent his life proving that beneath the chaos of life, there is an intelligence at work, the self, the soul's deepest knowing. It doesn't operate on the ego's timeline. It doesn't ask permission. It orchestrates experiences, patterns, losses, and arrivals with precision, all to wake you up to your wholeness. Nothing happens by chance. Not the timing, not the pain, not the people who hurt you or the dreams that fell apart. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And to become that, the false must fall away. The personas you wore to fit in. The relationships you clung to out of fear. The old versions of yourself that kept you small. Life didn't betray you by taking them. It loved you enough to set you free. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a soul in the process of individuation, of remembering your wholeness. And every so-called accident was actually a sacred step on that path. The unconscious has been guiding you all along, whispering through synchronicities, shouting through crises, always calling you home to yourself. So stop waiting for the universe to make sense. Stop demanding that life explain itself before you trust it again. You are a soul in the process of individuation, of remembering your wholeness. And every so-called accident was actually a sacred step on that path. The unconscious has been guiding you all along, whispering through synchronicities, shouting through crises, always calling you home to yourself. So stop waiting for the universe to make sense. Stop demanding that life explain itself before you trust it again. Start looking at your story with new eyes. See the patterns. See the preparation. See the intelligence beneath the pain. Because when you do, you'll realize you were never lost. You were always exactly where you needed to be, learning exactly what you needed to learn. The moment you stop resisting what happened and start receiving its lessons, you reclaim your power. You stop being life's victim and become its co-creator. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "What now?" And in that shift, everything changes. Not because life stops challenging you, but because you finally understand the challenge was never against you. It was always for you. If this video awakens something in your heart, if you're starting to see the hidden order in your own chaos, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because maybe they're standing in the ruins right now, believing they're broken. And maybe your share will be the synchronicity that reminds them, nothing is random. Everything is purpose. And if you're ready to keep walking this path of depth, shadow, and awakening, subscribe. Because this journey has just begun. The journey of seeing your life not as a series of accidents, but as a sacred unfolding. The journey of becoming who you were always meant to be, even when the path felt dark. Especially when the path felt dark. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And today, you get to choose again. Not to be a victim of your story, but the author of what comes next. Nothing happens by chance. Everything happens for a reason. And the reason is always your becoming.